Hey guys, in today's video, I bring you a simply unbelievable story full of spiritual revelations. Let's meet Marigold Thorne, a pediatric nurse who literally died for 9 minutes during a routine surgery and came back to life with a shocking message straight from Jesus. What she discovered on the other side will completely change her view of financial hardship and the true purpose behind it. So before we start, leave your like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any content like this, and activate the bell to receive all notifications. Now, get ready for this impactful spiritual journey that will stir your soul. My name is Marigold Thorne. If you met me before February 3rd, 2023, you would probably see me as an ordinary woman. I was a pediatric nurse at Minneapolis Children's Hospital, a single mother of 2 adorable children, Evelyn and Jonah, and I lived my life trying to balance my faith with the difficulties of everyday life. If you asked me back then, I would have told you that I knew Jesus, that I knew about God's love, and that somehow everything would work out. But to be honest, many nights I cried alone, questioning whether God really saw me. My financial struggles were constant. Even though I was a dedicated professional, my salary barely covered essential expenses. There were days when I found myself counting coins to buy milk and bread, and nights when I prayed that the next service cut notice wouldn't come. I was always faithful in church. I returned my tithes and helped as much as I could, but it seemed that prosperity was a miracle that happened in other people's lives, never in mine. Sometimes the shame and guilt overwhelmed me. Was I doing something wrong? Was God punishing me? When appendicitis took me by surprise, my first reaction was panic. Who would take care of the children? How would I pay the medical bills? When I was rushed to the operating room, my mind was full of worries. I remember holding the hand of my friend Rachel, who had left her shift to be with me. Her eyes were teary, but she forced a smile. "It's going to be okay, Mari. God is with you," she said, but the hesitation in her voice was clear. I just nodded, trying to believe it. When the anesthetics started to take effect, my last prayers were not for myself, but for my children. I asked God not to leave them helpless, to take care of them if I didn't return. And then, the world went dark. During the almost 2 years that followed my experience, I needed time to digest everything I experienced. It was a process of much prayer, of seeking clarity in the revelations I received. I didn't want to say anything without being sure it was the truth. Every word I share now comes from that place of deep reflection and love. My hope is that as you listen to me, you will find the same peace that I did and understand that even in your greatest struggles, God is working on your behalf. Before the surgery, my life was a succession of cloudy days, where each small victory seemed to be followed by an even bigger storm. My routine at Minneapolis Children's Hospital was intense, but I loved what I did. Working with children has always brought a unique kind of joy, even on the hardest days. Holding little hands, telling funny stories to alleviate their fear, feeling that I could be a light in the midst of families' pain. That gave me the strength to move forward. However, when the shift ended and I returned home, reality hit me like an icy wave. My house was simple, a small 2-bedroom apartment that I shared with Evelyn and Jonah. Children were my world. Evelyn, with her big brown eyes and kind heart, always seemed to understand when I was tired or worried. Jonah, with his inexhaustible energy, was the reason I never allowed myself to give up. But they also saw the deprivations. There were days when dinner was instant noodles because the budget didn't allow for more than that. "Why can't we go to the park today, Mom?" Evelyn asked once, holding her little brother's hand. "Don't we have money?" That hurt more than I could express. I sat next to them on the worn-out couch, hugging them. "Not today, honey, but I promise we will soon. God will help us, right?" I said the words, but deep down I questioned whether they were true. As a single mother, after being abandoned by my husband with no explanation, the weight of responsibilities seemed to double every day. Even with my faith, even though I tried to be a good Christian, financial difficulties were a constant shadow. When I started feeling abdominal pain, my first reaction was to ignore it. I couldn't afford to get sick, but the pain got worse, to the point where I was on my knees in the hospital bathroom. It was Rachel who found me there, my face pale, body shaking. "You need help, Mari. It can't go on like this," she said, her voice filled with genuine concern. She took me to the emergency room herself, insisted that the doctors see me immediately. The diagnosis was straightforward: acute appendicitis. I needed urgent surgery. Even in that situation, my mind did not disconnect from everyday worries. How much would this cost? Who would take care of the children? How would I pay the rent? As they prepared me for surgery, I held Rachel's hand and, in a whisper, asked her to take care of my children in case anything went wrong. She just nodded, tears filling her eyes. On the way to the operating room, all I could do was pray. But unlike other times my prayer was not a desperate request. It was a delivery. Thy will be done, Lord. And with that last prayer, the world around me faded away, taking all my earthly worries with it. Absolute silence was the first thing I remember after the physical world faded away. It wasn't the kind of silence that brings discomfort, but rather a feeling of welcome, like a mother's hug after a nightmare. I felt floating, weightless, as if every worry, every debt, every sadness had been left behind. There was no pain, no fear, just a peace so deep that my words could never fully capture. I saw my own body lying on the operating table. Dr. Lucas Hayward and his team were in a frenzy, fighting to get me back. I saw the flashing lights, the quick hands performing resuscitation maneuvers, the tense faces behind the surgical masks. It should have been scary, but it wasn't. I knew that body was mine, but at the same time, it wasn't. It was just a shell, a temporary shell. I was much more than that. I began to move upward, effortlessly, as if I were being lifted by invisible hands. The operating room got smaller and smaller, until everything around me turned into light. But this light was not just a physical brightness. She had life, pulsating like a giant heart, each beat bringing a wave of pure love. I felt enveloped, as if every particle of my soul was being caressed by this presence. And then he appeared, Jesus, but not the Jesus of paintings and sculptures. There was no long beard, no white tunic. His presence was almost indescribable. He was the light and, at the same time, a human figure. Your eyes, oh, those eyes. They were like windows to infinity. At the same time as they conveyed authority and majesty, there was a tenderness that made me feel like a child again, protected and loved unconditionally. Marigold, he said. His voice was not just sound. I felt it inside me, vibrating in every cell. You're not here by chance. I wanted to talk, explain how tired I was, how unfair life seemed. But before I could form words, he placed his hand on my shoulder, and an even greater peace enveloped me. In that touch, all the weight of abandonment, scarcity, sleepless nights, everything disappeared. I know what you've been carrying, he continued, and I want you to know that your difficulties are not a punishment. They are part of your preparation. Images began to appear around us, as if the air itself was projecting scenes from my life. I saw myself young, full of dreams. I saw my wedding day, that brief moment of happiness before abandonment. I saw my little children, Evelyn on my lap, Jonah holding my hand. And then I saw all the bills piling up, the calls from creditors, the looks of pity or judgment from other people. I saw every tear I shed, every prayer I said in the silence of the night. You always thought your financial difficulties were a curse, but I want to show you the truth, said Jesus. And the light around us began to reveal other stories. I saw people who had received prosperity before the right time. I saw how abundance took them away from God, how pride and self-sufficiency took the place of faith and humility. I saw lives crumbling under the weight of riches that their souls were not prepared to carry. Some of my chosen ones experience scarcity because I am building in them an unshakable faith, he explained. Lack, sometimes, is a shield. It protects you from stumbling before your time. It prepares your soul for something much greater. I felt every word as an absolute truth. There was no more doubt, just understanding. I knew that my life would never be the same after that moment, but I still didn't know that that encounter was about to lead me to even deeper revelations. The light around us seemed to pulse in sync with my own heart, as if I were connected directly to the source of life. Standing there before Jesus was like experiencing eternity compressed into every second. He didn't need to explain to me what was happening. I just knew. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a hallucination. I was in a spiritual dimension, a place where time and space didn't have the same meaning as before. Jesus enveloped me in his gaze, and suddenly, around us, the scenery changed. I was in front of a gigantic wall of light, where each beam seemed to contain a story, a life, a choice. I saw scenes from my own trajectory and that of other people. Some of them I recognized, others I didn't. It was as if I was witnessing the eternal now, where everything existed at the same time. In the midst of this overwhelming experience, Jesus began to teach me. He explained that financial difficulties were not, as I had always believed, a sign of abandonment or divine punishment. On the contrary, they were often a loving protection. I saw people who, when they received riches before the right time, had lost their souls to pride, to avarice, to the emptiness of materialism. In one of these visions, I watched the story of a man who, after winning the lottery, had completely distanced himself from God, immersed himself in excess, and lost everything, including his own life. Prosperity without spiritual maturity can be dangerous, said Jesus. When I withhold certain blessings, it is not to harm, but to protect. I am preparing the soil of the heart before planting the harvest. I also saw images from my own life. I remembered times when the little I had was just enough to avoid a major disaster. For example, the day my car broke down but I didn't have the money to take it to a mechanic. At the time, I cried with frustration, but now I saw that if I had driven that day, I would have had a serious accident. That foul was an act of protection. Jesus showed me that financial difficulties were often a sign of a significant spiritual calling. When the enemy cannot keep us from God in other ways, he attacks our finances. Knowing that scarcity can shake our faith, I saw scenes of spiritual battles happening around people. Beings of light fought against shadows, and every choice, every thought, seemed to influence the outcome of this invisible war. As these revelations unfolded, my heart was filled with hope. Suddenly, the unpaid bills, tight budget, and sleepless nights made sense. I was not a victim of chance. I was a chosen one, and my lack was a training, a purification, a test of faith. It was as if each financial loss taught me to trust money less and God more. You will see the financial disruption in due time, he promised. But until then, find contentment in me. Trust in my timing, because what I am building in you is worth more than gold. The sensation was that his every word not only reached my ears, but was embedded in my soul. Everything I knew about life and difficulties was transformed in that instant. I knew that when I returned, my mission would be to share this message with everyone who was ready to listen. And, although I still didn't understand why, something told me that the greatest miracle was yet to come. Suddenly, the light around me seemed to expand, encompassing not just me and Jesus, but the entire scene around us. It was as if I was being taken to a new layer of that spiritual dimension, where truths were revealed even more clearly. The feeling of absolute peace remained, but now there was also a growing sense of purpose. I was not just there to receive comfort, but to deeply understand what would be shown to me. Jesus raised his hand, and before us there appeared a vision of spiritual battles. They were intense scenes, as if the veil between the physical and spiritual world had been torn. I saw families kneeling in prayer, surrounded by shadows that tried to suffocate their faith. I saw people in utter despair, their minds flooded with thoughts of giving up, while angels fought against dark forces around them. Every tear, every plea seemed to strengthen the entities of light, while doubt and fear fueled the shadows. You see, Marigold, financial struggles are often more than earthly issues. These are spiritual battles. When you feel unable to pay a bill, when you find yourself choosing between food and rent, the enemy tries to use that vulnerability to undermine your faith. But every act of trust in me is a sword that cuts these bonds. He showed me scenes from my own life. I remembered one night, months before surgery, when I sat in the kitchen, looking at the last $5 bill in my wallet. Evelyn and Jonah slept in the next room, and I didn't know how I would make breakfast for them. That night I cried like a child, asking God why things were so difficult. Now, I saw that, instead of allowing myself to be consumed by hopelessness, I prayed. My prayer was not long or elaborate, just a whisper, "Lord, I trust in you," and it was enough. The next morning, Rachel showed up at my door with shopping bags, saying she felt in her heart that I needed help. At the time, I was grateful, but now I understood that this small miracle was part of this spiritual warfare. Jesus continued to show that these battles were not just to weaken me, but to strengthen me. Those who are called to great purposes face great resistance, he said. Each financial difficulty was a training camp. Your faith has been tempered in the fire of necessity, and now shines brighter than refined gold. The environment around us has changed again, Now I saw the future. I saw people listening to my testimony, their faces once marked by despair now illuminated by hope. I saw marriages restored, families united, lives transformed by the message I would bring. It was like watching seeds being planted in fertile soil, each one germinating and becoming a fruitful tree. I felt an energy growing inside me. It wasn't just the light around me, but an inner flame that was beginning to burn. My mission was clear. When I returned, my task would be to share this truth, that financial difficulties were not punishment, but preparation, that every moment of scarcity was an opportunity to trust God more and circumstances less. You will carry this message, Marigold, Jesus stated, and through your testimony, many will understand that financial battles are just a prelude to spiritual victory. At that moment, I felt an indescribable lightness, as if my spirit was expanding. But at the same time, something began to gently tug at my consciousness. The light around us began to fade away, and I realized that my spiritual journey was about to take a new direction. I was being called back to my body. The feeling was of leaving paradise behind, but with the certainty that my mission on earth had not yet ended. As the light began to recede, I felt like I was being pulled back into a tight shell. It was as if my once expanded and free soul was being gently guided back into my physical body. The spiritual environment around me gradually dissolved, and the visions of Jesus, spiritual battles and revelations faded like a dream at dawn. Yet, unlike a dream, every word, every sensation, and every image remained imprinted on me with surprising clarity. Suddenly, heavenly silence gave way to earthly chaos. I heard muffled voices, sounds of machines beeping and intense pressure in my chest. I opened Dr. eyes and face. Lucas Hayward was the first thing I saw. He was maskless, his eyes wide and filled with a mix of relief and disbelief. He didn't seem to know whether to laugh or cry. Behind him, the medical team stood, some with their hands over their mouths, others just frozen, as if they couldn't believe what they were seeing. "She's back. My God, she's really back," I heard one of the nurses whisper. "Marigold, can you hear me?" asked Dr. Hayward, his voice shaking. We lost you for over 9 minutes." I just nodded, my throat too dry to speak. There was a slight pain in my chest, probably a result of the chest compressions, but other than that, I felt incredibly good. My mind was clear, my heart at peace. There was no weight of doubt, financial worry, or fear. There was just an absolute certainty that I had been brought back for a purpose. As doctors performed tests, the buzz in the hospital spread. Rachel appeared in my room a short time later, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She hugged me so tightly that I almost lost my breath again. "I thought I lost you, Mari. I thought." Her voice broke and I just held her, letting her cry. When I could finally speak, my voice was soft, almost like a whisper. "I saw Jesus, Rachel. He showed me so many things, and I need to share that." In the days that followed, I underwent a series of tests. Doctors were looking for any sign of brain damage, any sequelae of clinical death, but they found nothing. I was perfectly healthy. Dr. Hayward, who had always been a skeptical man, could not hide his astonishment. In a moment of rare vulnerability, he sat next to my bed, his hands clasped together as if in prayer. "Marigold, scientifically speaking, you shouldn't be here. Not like that. We tried everything. We even gave up." He took a deep breath, as if the words cost him effort. "What did you see? What did you experience?" I looked at him, knowing this was the beginning of my mission. "I saw the sky, Dr. Hayward. I saw Jesus, and he gave me a message. I'm not back by chance." He was silent for a long time, just looking at me, and in that look, I saw the seed of doubt give way to faith. It wasn't just a miracle for me. It was a miracle for everyone who witnessed my resurrection. Even in the hospital, I began to share what I had learned. Nurses, doctors, visitors, each person who approached seemed to be attracted by an invisible force. I knew that every word I spoke was like a spark, igniting a flame of hope in those who needed to hear it. And with each story I told, I felt my purpose strengthened, as if the sky itself was supporting me. After being released from the hospital, my life felt both the same and completely different. My small apartment in Minneapolis was still the same. Peeling walls, weathered furniture, the tiny kitchen where I prepared meals from the pantry. But something inside me had changed irrevocably. I knew my mission now was to share everything I had seen and learned during my near-death experience. In the beginning, It wasn't easy. Even with all the peace and certainty I felt, there was still fear of how people would react to my story. And what's more, my financial situation hadn't transformed overnight. The bills kept coming, and I still found myself stretching every penny to make sure Evelyn and Jonah had enough. However, instead of anxiety, I felt a deep calm. Now I knew that every financial difficulty was a preparation, a spiritual training. My friend Rachel was the first to encourage me to share my story publicly. "Marie, what you experienced is not just for you. It's for all of us. People need to hear this message." She helped organize small meetings at the church, where I began to share my testimony. At first, it was just a few familiar faces, close friends and congregation members. But as the news spread, more and more people started to show up. I found myself facing strangers who came seeking comfort, answers, hope. Each person brought with them a story of struggle, and many were moved to learn that their financial difficulties could be seen from a new perspective. During one of these meetings, a woman approached me after the service. She had teary eyes and was holding my hand tightly. "I was about to give up," she said, her voice breaking. "My husband and I are losing our home. I thought God had abandoned us, but hearing you talk, it gave me strength to continue." These moments became more and more frequent. Dr. Hayward himself appeared at one of the meetings. At first, he remained in the background, arms crossed, his gaze still carrying some of the skepticism from before. But in the end, he approached. His face softened. "Marigold, I still don't understand everything that happened, but something in me has changed since that day in the hospital. I feel like I need to hear more." These words were a gift. The man of science began to make room for faith, and it wasn't just him. Other doctors, fellow nurses, even patients began sharing their own experiences, many of them recounting small and large divine interventions in their lives. However, even with all the positive impact, there were still challenges. My financial situation remained tight, but now I saw every difficulty as a chance to strengthen my faith. When the rent was late, instead of panicking, I prayed, and, almost miraculously, a sister from the church felt in her heart the desire to bless me, covering that month's expenses. I wasn't living in material abundance, but my soul was overflowing with gratitude, and little by little, things started to change. I received an offer to work in nursing leadership at the hospital, which meant a salary increase and more stability for my family. But more than that, it meant I had an even bigger platform to share my testimony. Every hallway conversation, every patient I saw, was an opportunity to spread the message that financial struggles are not punishment, but preparation. And somehow my own life has become living proof that even in scarcity, God is faithful and always present. The days that followed were a mix of everyday challenges and supernatural moments. Even after my near-death experience, the reality of the accumulated bills, lack of resources, and children's needs was still present. However, something in me had changed profoundly. I no longer saw financial difficulties as an unbearable burden, but as a journey of faith and preparation. One morning, as I was packing Evelyn and Jonah's lunchbox, the phone rang. It was the bank. My heart skipped a beat. My account had been negative for days, and I was afraid it would be another charge. I took a deep breath before answering. "Mrs. Thorne, this is from the financial sector. We would like to inform you that an amount has been deposited into your account. Looks like someone paid off their debt." I remained silent, trying to process that information. I didn't know anyone with the financial means to do something like that. "He is sure. Who made the deposit?" "It was anonymous," the attendant replied, and I could hear a slight note of surprise in her voice. "But the amount covers your expenses and still leaves a positive balance." I hung up the phone and fell to my knees in the kitchen. The children came running, worried, but all I could do was thank God. That morning, more than ever, I understood what Jesus had shown me, that He would always provide, but in His time and in His way. As I continued to share my testimony, church gatherings began to grow. People from other cities came to hear my story. Many reported how their own financial difficulties were being seen in a new light. "I feel like my debts no longer define me," said a man at one of the meetings. "Now I see it as a phase, not the end." Dr. Hayward, who now came regularly to meetings, began sharing his own transformation process. I thought that only what I could see and touch was real, but after seeing Marigold return with no medical explanation, well, my logic was challenged. And now, My faith is awakening. This kind of change in others filled me with hope. The message Jesus gave me was reaching more hearts than I could ever imagine. And little by little, I saw the fruits of this mission. My own financial situation began to stabilize. Not that I had become rich, but enough was always enough. A promotion at the hospital, unexpected donations, extra work coming up at the right time. It was as if God was showing me that the scarcity had served its purpose, and that now, little by little, the supply was flowing. Still, I never lost sight of what Jesus had taught me. He knew that material prosperity was only safe when accompanied by spiritual maturity. I continued to live simply, teaching my children about the value of faith and gratitude. Evelyn and Jonah, even though they were so young, seemed to understand. "Mommy, Jesus takes care of us, doesn't he?" asked Evelyn one night. "Always, my love," I replied, feeling my heart warm. Every time I stood at the pulpit or shared my story in small groups, I remembered Jesus' words. The biggest disruption was not financial, but spiritual. I saw people being freed from the fear, the guilt, the shame of not having enough. I saw relationships being restored, lives being renewed, and, most importantly, souls being reconnected to divine love. The path was still challenging, but now I knew that each difficulty was a stepping stone on my spiritual journey. And more than that, each step taken in faith echoed in eternity, fulfilling the greater purpose for which I had been called. My return to physical life was surrounded by an atmosphere of miracle. It wasn't just the fact that I came back after more than 9 minutes of clinical death, but the way I came back, without any after effects, without brain damage, as if those moments between life and death had only purified me and not affected me physically. The medical team was perplexed. Dr. Hayward, ever so skeptical, looked at me as if he were seeing something supernatural, and, in fact, he was. In the first few days after my return, I underwent a series of tests. It was as if the doctors needed a rational explanation for what had happened, but there wasn't. All tests showed that I was perfectly healthy. More than that, my health parameters were better than before the surgery. My recovery was quick, almost miraculous, and as the doctors pored over the results, I knew, deep in my soul, that there was a much bigger reason I was back. During my recovery in the hospital, I received many visitors, co-workers, church friends, even strangers who heard about my story. Each meeting was an opportunity to share the message that Jesus had entrusted to me. "We are not being punished," I said. "We are being prepared." Every financial struggle is a chance to strengthen our faith, to trust that God has a greater purpose. Dr. Hayward began visiting me after hours. He would sit by my bed, often silently, just listening. One afternoon, he finally broke the silence. "Marigold, I am not a religious man. I always believed that science had all the answers. But what happened to you? I can't explain it. None of us can." I smiled, knowing this wasn't just a scientific question, but the beginning of a spiritual awakening. "Perhaps some answers cannot be found in exams or medical reports, doctor. Maybe we need to look beyond what the eyes can see." He remained silent, but his eyes revealed an internal battle. That night, I prayed that God would touch his heart, the same way he had touched mine. And, little by little, I saw this transformation happen. He began attending church meetings, no longer as a distant observer, but as someone seeking answers beyond reason. When I was discharged, I left the hospital not only with my health restored, but with a clear mission. Rachel helped me organize the first dates at her home. At first, and they were just friends and church members, but word spread quickly. Soon the small group grew and we needed a larger space to accommodate everyone who wanted to hear my story. Each meeting was a miracle in itself. People arrived carrying the weight of debt, unemployment, and the fear of not being able to support their families. And they left there with their eyes shining, not because their problems had disappeared, but because they now had a new perspective. "I had never thought that my financial difficulties could be God's protection," a man once said. "Now I see that I may need to grow spiritually before I can receive the blessing I so long for." Seeing these changes in people was a gift to my soul. My own financial struggles were still present, but now I saw them as part of a greater purpose. And miraculously, enough always arrived. An anonymous donation to pay the rent, a basic food basket left on my doorstep, an extra job that came up at the right time. It was as if God was constantly reminding me, "I have your back." The doctors, especially Dr. Hayward, continued to follow my journey. He invited me to share my experience at a medical conference, not as a clinical case study, but as an example that life goes beyond what science can understand. That day, as I spoke in front of an audience of doctors and students, I felt the presence of Jesus at my side, guiding me, strengthening me. When I finished my report, the silence in the room was almost palpable, and then, one by one, they began to applaud. It was not just a human recognition, but a divine confirmation that I was on the right path. Every word I said was not just mine, but an echo of the message I received in that dimension of light and love. And so, the miracle of my return spread, not just in my life, but in the lives of all those who were willing to listen and believe that financial hardships, when viewed from a divine perspective, can be a prelude to greater spiritual blessings. The months following my return to life were a journey of discovery, not only spiritual but also practical. I was still struggling financially, and life as a single mother took every ounce of strength I possessed. However, the peace I carried within me transformed each challenge into an opportunity to trust God more deeply. The message Jesus delivered to me during my near-death experience has become the center of my life. I started to see each difficult situation as part of a preparation process. Money remained scarce, but instead of feeling despair, I prayed, and every time it seemed like the situation was about to fall apart, an unexpected supply arrived. A neighbor would show up with a bag of groceries, an acquaintance from church would offer me extra work, or an anonymous amount would appear in my bank account, covering exactly what I needed. I realized that each financial difficulty was not a punishment, but a way to refine my faith. Jesus had shown me that often the greatest miracle was not material abundance, but contentment in the midst of scarcity. Each difficult moment turned into a reminder that my true wealth was in my faith, in the love for my children, and in the mission to share this message of hope. Church meetings continued to grow. People facing financial challenges came from far and wide to hear my story. During one of these meetings, a young mother approached me, tears streaming down her face. "Marigold, I was about to give up. My rent is late. My bills are piling up." I thought God had forgotten me. I held his hands and looked into his eyes. "I know exactly how you feel, but I want you to know that each of these fights has a purpose. It's not the end. It's just the beginning of something bigger." At that moment, I felt the presence of Jesus beside me, as if he was speaking through me. The young mother calmed down, and I could see hope being reborn in her, not because his problems were gone, but because his perspective had changed. My own financial situation also began to change, gradually and miraculously. I received a promotion at the hospital, taking on a leadership position in the nursing sector. In addition to the salary increase, the new role gave me the opportunity to positively influence my colleagues, sharing my faith not just in words, but in actions. The moments of silent prayer in the hallway, the comfort offered to patients in delicate situations, and the support for colleagues who were also facing their own struggles became part of my daily life. Dr. Hayward, now a close friend, continued to follow my path. He himself had started attending church, and it was common to see him sitting in meetings, listening attentively to each testimony. His own transformation was visible. He began to talk about faith, not as something opposed to science, but as a complementary dimension of life. "Marigold, you made me see that healing goes beyond the physical. Sometimes what people need most is not a prescription, but a word of hope." My children, Evelyn and Jonah, grew up surrounded by this faith environment. Even at such a young age, they understood the importance of gratitude and trust in God. One night, as we were preparing dinner together, Evelyn hugged me and said, "Mommy, I know Jesus will always take care of us." His voice had such deep certainty that my eyes filled with tears. She understood, as I did, that blessings were not measured by what we had in our pockets, but by what we carried in our hearts. And so, day after day, I continued the mission that Jesus entrusted to me. There was no guarantee of a life without financial challenges, but there was the certainty that each struggle was a lesson, each difficulty was preparation, and each victory was proof of divine love. I knew my story wasn't just mine. It was a beacon for those navigating the turbulent waters of scarcity, showing that even in the greatest storms, God's light never stops shining. As my life stabilized and my mission expanded, I began to understand that my purpose went beyond sharing my own story. I needed to help other people see their own financial struggles in the spiritual light that Jesus revealed to me. My church talks turned into larger gatherings, not just in Minneapolis but in other cities as well. I was invited to faith events, support groups, and even local radio shows, where my voice reached people I may never have met in person. With each encounter, I heard stories that mirrored my own journey. Men and women who had lost jobs, families who struggled to put food on the table, young people in debt and without hope, and in every face, I saw the reflection of my own despair from before. But now, I had the opportunity to offer a new perspective, a truth that went beyond the visible circumstances. God is not punishing you, I repeated at every opportunity. He is protecting you, preparing you. Scarcity can be a shield, an opportunity to build unshakable faith. During one of these meetings, an elderly woman approached me after the service. She held a yellowed photo in her hands, a portrait of a son lost to drugs years before. I always thought my poverty was a punishment, she said, her voice trembling. But you made me see that God was keeping me close to Him. If I had been prosperous then, maybe I would have lost my way too. These moments showed me that my experience was not just a personal testimony, but a tool for collective healing. Each person who found hope in my story reinforced my purpose, making me understand that even in the smallest conversations, the spiritual impact could be profound and lasting. Meanwhile, my own financial life was beginning to reflect the divine promises I shared. My new position at the hospital brought stability, but more than that, it brought connections. Colleagues began to seek me out not only for professional issues, but also for spiritual advice. Sometimes, a simple coffee break turned into a prayer session. I became a bridge between the physical and spiritual worlds, helping others see God in the details of everyday life. Dr. Hayward was a living example of this transformation. His skeptical and scientific mind was now open to the mystery of faith. At a meeting at the hospital, he shared his own journey. I always believed in logic, in what could be proven, but seeing Marigold return from death with no scientific explanation showed me that there is something bigger. Today, I know that the miracle was not just her coming back to life, but the impact of this renewed life on all of us. My children also grew up surrounded by this atmosphere of faith and purpose. Evelyn, now 9 years old, began writing little notes of encouragement and leaving them at school for her classmates. Jonah, always so energetic, organized food drives with neighborhood children to help families in need. Seeing this seed planted in them blossoming was proof that what Jesus had shown me was being passed on beyond my generation. With each testimony, I felt that my mission was being accomplished. But Jesus had made it clear that the biggest disruption was not the financial one, but the spiritual one. And that was exactly what I saw. People finding peace in the midst of the storm, learning to trust God even when resources seemed scarce, lives being transformed not by material abundance, but by the certainty that each difficulty was part of a greater plan. However, I knew that my work would not be finished until someone needed to hear this message. I continued traveling, speaking, praying, and, most importantly, authentically living what I preached. And with each person I saw their eyes light up, I knew that my near-death experience was not just a personal miracle, but a divine gift to share with the world. As time passed, my life became a living testimony of what Jesus had shown me during my near-death experience. I continued to face financial challenges, but my perspective was completely different. Each late bill, each unforeseen financial event was received no longer with despair, but with a calm confidence that God was in control. I learned to see difficulties as opportunities to deepen my faith and strengthen my dependence on Christ. In every meeting, lecture, or conversation, I reinforced this message. Financial struggles are not punishment. They are protection, preparation, and purification. People who previously saw themselves as victims of fate now began to see their own journeys with new eyes. Many shared with me how their situations began to change after adopting this new spiritual vision. I stopped complaining and started being grateful for what I had, said a young father, and suddenly doors started opening, not just financial, but spiritual. I myself saw this happen in my life. Even though my financial situation hadn't transformed into material abundance, enough was always enough. But the greatest gift was the contentment I felt. There was no longer the pressure to meet worldly standards of success. I knew that my true prosperity was in the peace I felt and the positive impact my story had on the people around me. A defining moment occurred at a community event, where I was invited to share my testimony in front of hundreds of people. I went up to the stage, feeling the presence of Jesus at my side. I told my story, from the hardest days to the heavenly experience. I spoke about the spiritual shield that financial difficulties represented and how God's preparation was always accompanied by a profound inner transformation. In the end, a woman approached me. She was visibly emotional, her eyes teary. I was on the verge of giving up. I have so many debts that I don't know how I'm going to get out of this. But listening to you, something inside me changed. I feel like I can continue, that there is a purpose. I hugged her and we prayed together. The presence of God at that moment was palpable. I knew my mission was being accomplished, but I also knew it would never be completely over. As long as there was someone who needed to hear this message, I would continue speaking. I continued writing, sharing videos, participating in meetings, and, above all, living according to what Jesus had taught me. My own life has become an example that even if financial circumstances don't change right away, spiritual transformation is the true miracle. Today, I see my children growing up with faith and gratitude. I see people around me finding peace in the midst of financial chaos. And above all, I see that God's love truly protects us, prepares us, and purifies us. The final message I leave is simple but powerful. If you are experiencing financial difficulties, don't see it as a punishment. Trust the process. Know that God is orchestrating something greater, that each battle won in faith strengthens your spiritual authority. The financial break will come at the right time, but until then, find contentment in Christ. Live each day with gratitude and keep your eyes fixed on eternity. I am Marigold Thorn, and this is my story. A story of struggles, but also of spiritual victories. Living proof that even in the biggest storms, God always guides us to a safe haven. If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.